Welcome, everybody. The Cal Podcast, championing our wellness. Today we're here with Dr. Norwood. Hello.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Once again, we are your hosts. I'm Donovan,
I'm Gian.
and yeah.
Am I supposed to look at that camera?
It's all right.
I probably won't. But
It's all right. It's all right.
That's right. I don't look at it much either. So.
Yeah, you do. All right, whatever. So, Dr. Norwood, thank you for coming
Yeah.
on the podcast today.
Absolutely.
Do you want to do like a little shameless plug and tell everybody on campus, your role?
Sure, I know. So I've been here at SHIP. This is my 7th year, but I still meet not only students but faculty and staff who have no idea who I am because I'm pretty good at staying in my psychology bubble. So I'm an associate professor in the psych department. I'm a clinical psychologist, so that means I have a license. And before I came to SHIP, I worked at a state psychiatric hospital in Maryland in the addiction and trauma unit.
Nice.
That's awesome. That's cool. And that sounds pretty hectic. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. And I still, so my first 4 years here, I just quote unquote taught, did research, served on committees. But the past 3-ish years, I've maintained a telehealth private practice, and I also do evaluations for the state of Pennsylvania, like court-ordered evaluations, competency to stand trial, which, addiction comes up in those a lot as well. Yeah.
All right, well, our first question that we had for you here today is to, from your perspective, what is mental health?
Ooh, that's a great question that I don't get asked a lot.
right?
But I think sometimes when we hear mental health, it gets conflated with mental illness. Like mental health is a bad thing. Like only people who have problems or who have an anxiety disorder or depression have mental health. But everybody has mental health, just like everybody has physical health.
Yeah.
So mental health, I think, is really just, the state of your well-being as it pertains to your emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. And so I think normal mental health fluctuates, right? Like normal mental health means like you have bad days, you have sad days, you have fantastic days, right? There's a lot of normal variation that makes up mental health.
Yeah.
Definitely with the fluctuations and the different, how
Especially
things,
this time of year.
Seasonal depression.
Yeah.
That's real.
Yeah, I just came from a meeting and with other faculty, and we were all just sitting there. No one was really chatting. We're all just kind of like stoic looking.
Staring into the
and
bench
our chair said, "It's November, huh?" Like,
Yep.
And that's kind of to your point, G, that this, there's fluctuations, and there's some fluctuations in mental health that might be shared, right? Like when you're on a college campus, there's shared fluctuations maybe around like, oh, finals are coming up, or everyone's like counting down the days until Thanksgiving break and things like that.
What are we at, 2 weeks now?
I
Something
think
like
so.
That?
Right up on
We're
it.
counting the days.
Yeah.
So to kind of jump into another segment, you said that you do like therapy and talking to individuals who may need help. I know a big thing, being a male myself, there's a big stigma around going out, reaching out for help. What are your thoughts on that, and what have you kind of seen?
Yeah, I think you're not wrong that there is a stigma, but I also think that there's what I've observed is less stigma in younger generations. So I think your all's generation, current college students, current high school students are much more aware of their mental health and the need maybe to connect and reach out and get help than previous generations.
Yeah.
But this isn't universal, there are still pockets and cultures and even within different groups, like even different racial groups, like black men and women tend to get help at lower rates, and part of that is because of like distrust of healthcare professionals, rightfully so, right?
Yeah.
Like historical injustices, right? And then also having trouble finding maybe a provider who understands your experiences, who looks like you. So I think telehealth, which is something I do, has really helped with that, because now, like, I have a credential called PsyPact, so I can do telehealth in, I think it's 40 states now.
Okay.
So that means other people, right, who have the PsyPact credential can do that as well. So now we can be a lot more nuanced. Like I have colleagues who are saying like, okay, I have a 22-year-old Indian woman. She wants a Indian therapist
Yeah.
And like we can do that now in a way that you really couldn't do before. So I think that I really, for that reason, champion telehealth, because people can stay, not that it should replace, going and seeing a provider in person, but people are busy, people are stressed. And the fact that you can just be so much more selective and like finding someone who's a good fit for you, and you don't have to leave your house.
Yeah.
So
It's definitely nice.
So yeah, I think there is a stigma, but I think it's improving, maybe not as fast as we'd like it to.
Yeah. So, like the secondary question to that was, how have you noticed that change since, when you first came into the field versus now?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've just seen it personally and professionally. I mean, when I was an undergraduate, so, I'll date myself here, but I graduated in 2006. So in the early 2000s, when I was an undergrad, I saw a therapist in our counseling center, and I remember like that was like a deep, dark secret, I didn't want anybody to know. And, in my classes regularly, I have students say like, okay, so when I saw my therapist last week, they said this, or, well, when I was in the hospital, this happened, and I'm just astounded, like in the best way.
Yeah.
I'm astounded at how much more open, my students are versus like my generation. Even when I was in graduate school, some graduate programs in psychology and mental health really encourage you to do your own work, have your own therapist, but some don't. Mine did not. Mine probably perpetuated that stigma, which is kind of ironic, honestly. But it was a kind of like, a buttoned up research university, kind of prestigious, and they didn't say don't go, but it just was kind of like
under the radar.
Yes,
It was
subtle.
Yeah.
Yeah. You were getting those messages, and so I remember being in the counseling center there once, because again, anytime therapy was free, I went. So I went in undergrad, I went in grad school, free therapy. And I remember being in the waiting room, and then another friend of mine, two other friends of mine who were in my program were also in the waiting room. And it's like we all looked around and we're like, oh.
Uh-huh.
And that was great because it was very validating and normalizing. Like, we're all going through this stressful experience, but we couldn't have those conversations like until that point. Whereas like I see my students having those conversations openly with other peers. They've never been in a class with them before. And not everyone, like everyone has different comfort levels in how much they share. Some students share a lot with me, like in written assignments, but they might not say it in the classroom.
Outward.
Yeah, and I respect that 100%. But I've definitely seen a shift. I think with the good, there comes some negative, right? Like we have students today and young people today have access to social media and YouTube and all these things in a way that I didn't have access to, but that means you can access professionals who really know what they're talking about. You can access evidence-based resources, but you can also access a lot of people who don't know what they're talking about.
Definitely.
And
the social comparison and all that too, I think that can weigh on.
Yeah, and that can negatively contribute to mental health. But then sometimes, right, people find this stuff on the internet or on YouTube and they're like, okay, like these videos on this is what high functioning anxiety looks like, and it's just like a bunch of experiences that might be true for a person but really aren't characteristic of anxiety. And so that part I don't love. Yeah.
I get that. We talked a little bit about like seasonal depression like earlier on. I was just wondering, like it's a perfect time of the year for it right now because I know a lot of college students are dealing with that. So I was just wondering if you had like any tips or tricks or
Sure.
anything.
So, yeah, and I want to first say, like, if people's moods shift a little bit this time of year, you don't necessarily have a diagnosable seasonal depression. I know you guys aren't saying that. And first, like, you might, right? But also you might not because our moods shift and, it's getting darker earlier. And so a lot of that, it might be part of the normal variation. But at the same time, you might want to know, like, well, what can I do to prevent myself from going kind of further or from it really becoming a problem, right? And we can talk about that at some point, like maybe how to recognize if your mood fluctuations are normal or there's something else, right? But there's some big things that anybody can do that might kind of seem like cliche or a cop-out, but they work. First is sleep like sleeping enough.
Yeah.
And that means sleeping enough and not sleeping too much. Like I know college students, y'all can be victim to getting very little sleep during the week and then getting a ton of sleep on the weekends. And our bodies just don't work that way. Like you can't make up that kind of sleep debt. So you really want to get consistently 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night, every night. I have changed the way I handle late assignments and things, because I want my students, if something is due and they're stressing over it, I want them to go to sleep. So I accept things up to 3 days late with no penalty, so that people won't do that. And I don't know if it's helping or if they're just treating the 3 days later like their new deadline.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
I think I'm seeing some success there, but I've experimented because I really don't want to kind of contribute to that problem. And I know my classes are just one class, and students have other classes that they're contending with. But getting enough sleep, getting enough natural light.
Okay.
That you might know that they make these unnatural artificial lights that kind of remind me of this that you can get like to boost your vitamin D, like if you have if you're prone to kind of like seasonal mood shifts. So they actually sell these, and they're not very expensive.
Okay.
That's pretty cool.
Better to get natural sunlight, but if you don't have access to natural sunlight, or because it gets dark so early, that's something people can do like in the evenings, is they can use. Is my mic okay?
Yeah, you're okay.
They can use, one of those lights. But getting outside, preferably earlier in the day, like exposing yourself to natural sunlight, can do wonders for your mood. Like first thing when you wake up, open the shades, open the curtain, which nobody wants to do. But the one kind of nice thing about it getting dark earlier is it gets light earlier in the day. So we're seeing the sun earlier. So getting that natural sunlight exposure, movement, like intentional movement. Notice I didn't say exercise. It doesn't have to be exercise. Like you don't have to go to the gym, but walking, just any kind of intentional movement, yoga, stretching, going for a walk with friends, even better.
Okay.
Because the fourth one is really like social connection.
Okay.
So I think when it gets dark, people feel even more of a pull to kind of like withdraw and isolate and watch movies and kind of like hibernate. And you might not be as social. So maintaining your social connections, preferably in person, because it really does affect our hormones differently and our neurotransmitters differently when we're in the same room as somebody versus when we're on the phone with them or we're on FaceTime.
Does it really? That's interesting.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that.
So, it's great. If, like, the only way you can connect with people that day or that week is on the phone, that is better,
than nothing.
Yeah. And, like, FaceTime is better than phone is better than text. It's kind of like you rank
There's a hierarchy.
the intimacy, you know what I mean, really, in terms of, like, social connection.
Yeah.
But any kind of connection is better than none.
Absolutely.
So those, I think, are big ones that aren't earth-shattering, but they are probably areas that everybody struggles with.
Yeah. So Kurt mentioned that you had an interest in harm reduction, like briefly. So I wanted to just kind of get your opinion on it and how it can help people struggling.
Yeah, so when I think about harm reduction, I think specifically kind of like in the addiction arena, and that's probably what he was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And because historically, like in addiction treatment and addiction, and mental health treatment are very intertwined, because about half of all folks who have substance use disorders have mental health disorders and vice versa. But historically, a lot of addiction treatment camps, treatment centers were focused on abstinence only, right? Like you have to completely stop use of that substance. And, to the point where some of these programs require people to come in and like pee in a cup and do all these things. And you can be kicked out if you have like a quote unquote dirty, sample and stuff like that. And that just kind of doesn't align well with the science, of addiction and of behavior change, which we know to be one of the biggest models is called the trans-theoretical model. And I know neither of you are psych majors, but it's also called the stages of change model.
Okay.
And it applies to all behavior change, not just to addiction, but it basically says like the way we change is stage-based. We go through these like intentional phases. You know, like if someone stops eating junk food or starts a workout program, you see the end result. But there was all this stuff that happened before they got to that point.
Tedious
They
things
had
in the
to,
middle.
like before you get to the point of having a workout routine, right, you had to become aware that there was sort of a problem with the way you were currently living. You had to become convinced that things would be better if you moved more. You had to make a plan to figure out how you were going to do that. Then you had to figure out what kind of exercise you were going to do, where you were going to go. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So changing addictive behavior goes through those same stages. And the first stage is called pre-contemplation, and that's sort of before thinking about.
Okay.
So essentially people who don't think their behavior is a problem, or who know their behavior is a problem but right now don't want to change it. I do hear that a lot. Like some of my like college age students and drinking, like, yeah, the way I'm drinking now is awful, but I won't do this my whole life. So I won't do this in 5 years. I won't do this when I'm a working professional. So they're in pre-contemplation. They're not saying there's no problem. They're just saying, I don't want to do anything about it now. So harm reduction, where harm reduction comes in, is it's just more aligned with that understanding of how people change. And the goal is to reduce, you know, the impact of whatever addiction they have, as opposed to saying you have to get rid of this completely. And often you can get more buy-in with someone if you can come at it from that perspective, as opposed to saying like, you have to stop this. Yeah, you have to stop. Especially if that person is in pre-contemplation or contemplation, they won't agree with you. What they'll do is they just won't come back and ever see you again, right? Versus if you say like, you know, hey, I'm concerned about you. I want you to live a long, healthy life, and for your health and well-being, and ideally connecting it to their goals. Like maybe their goal is saving money, so maybe it's not health. So you connect it to that. Like if you could do this a little bit less, how much money would you save? You know? And harm reduction comes in lots of ways. So it could just be like reducing how much someone uses, or using medications like agonist or antagonist medicines that kind of help with cravings or help somebody reduce. So like a nicotine patch, if you're familiar with that, for people who want to quit smoking, like that's a form of harm reduction. They're still receiving nicotine through that patch.
Yeah.
But that is far less harmful than combustible tobacco that you're smoking.
Absolutely. Do you want to ask a question?
I got it. All right. So switching over once again, we're gonna dive into. We're both on the track team, so we're gonna.
Okay, cool.
We're gonna dive into the athletic world a little bit.
Okay.
So before we started the pod, we talked a little bit about, you know, sports psychology, stuff like that. So sports psych is like a new and upcoming thing. I don't know. Does that sound about right?
I am not, I want to be clear that I'm not a sports psychologist or a sports psych expert. Okay, I thought he was talking to me. He's like pointing.
No, it's all
I gotta not look out the window. I'm not a sports psych expert. And so I know it's been around for, I don't know how long. I don't want to misspeak, but I think maybe awareness of the field and awareness of athletes' sort of like unique needs and unique mental health needs. I think that is kind of on the rise. Like I'm thinking of Simone Biles in the 2020, right? Was it 2020 Olympics?
2020,
and her kind of knowing, like, and it being primarily based on like her mental health at the time, that she needed to stop, I think kind of helped with the rise and understanding of the impact on your mental health that sports can take.
I think it's interesting. I mean, it's hard to say when I was younger because I'm already young, but even at a younger age, you know, when you're 10, 11, 12, kids aren't going to be going to see a sports psychologist. But now, like in the sports world nowadays, like I feel like if every 1 out of 5 of my friends, whether, you know, it's in the track world or they're playing another completely different sport, one of them is seeing a sports psychologist. So, and I think it's interesting because, you know, I talk to them about it and they say it boosts their game tremendously.
Yeah.
So,
and that's sort of, you know, the difference, right? Sports psychologists who tend to be clinical psychologists. So like I'm a clinical psychologist, but I tend to focus in kind of like health, addiction, and forensics. Sports psychologists are usually clinical psychologists too, but they focus specifically on performance, right? Like athletic performance and what kind of like mental barriers you have to performance and what kind of limiting beliefs affect your performance and that sort of thing.
Yeah, It's a big thing. in the
And I'm sure
sports
there's a
world.
lot more to it than
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
We can dive deep into it.
Yeah. So piggybacking off of like that whole performance thing, obviously like anxiety and stress are a big part of mental health, and they can obviously play a big part in a student athlete's performance, both in academics and in athletics. So I just wanted to like gauge your mind, see like how they can affect the performance.
Yeah, anxiety and stress. I'll just kind of start with anxiety. I mean, they're related, but kind of slightly different concepts. But anxiety, is something everybody experiences, right? Everybody at different levels. Like some people kind of describe themselves as more anxious than others. Some people, like their just arousal level with anxiety isn't as high. And for most of us, it's situational, right? Like that there are particular experiences, situations that might kind of lead our anxiety to rise, right, or fall. Some people don't find public speaking anxiety provoking. I do.
I do too.
But I don't find teaching really anxiety provoking. And then that's sort of
It's
public
interesting,
speaking,
yeah.
but it's different.
Uh-huh.
And part of that, I mean, this kind of connects well, like part of what helps us habituate, that is kind of like adjust to anxiety and not be so affected by it, is repeated exposure. Like the worst thing you can do for anxiety is avoid the anxiety-provoking thing, because what that tends to do is basically signal to your brain that really was dangerous, and thank goodness we got away from it. That was super dangerous.
Yeah.
And so then whatever that avoided experience thing, this is kind of how phobias form too, becomes much more intense and scary. So then the next time you encounter it, you avoid it again, it becomes worse, right? So exposure to whatever is feared, and when like anxiety, when something makes you anxious, generally what we think is like it feels threatening, but it's not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and what I mean by like, is it threatening emotionally? Maybe, but like public speaking, is that actually threatening to my physical well-being? No, but it feels threatening, right? It almost feels the same way like you might feel when you're in a car and like you're close to getting in an accident or something, even though that really is physically threatening. And that's what we call fear. Like that's a response to like an actual threatening stimulus or perceived threatening kind of stimulus.
Yeah.
So with anxiety, exposure is very helpful to the feared thing, to the thing that makes us anxious, and kind of understanding that at manageable levels, anxiety can improve your performance. So both of you are students and both of you are athletes. I mean, knowing you have, what are your I'm not good with track.
Our events.
Yes, I was like, what do you call it? I was like, I was
It's
going to say,
okay.
what's your sport? Your events. Yeah, what are
Yeah.
your events?
We're both throwers.
Yeah.
Throwers.
So
So
like-
is that javelin or?
Yeah, so
That's the one that we don't throw.
That's
what you don't do?
yeah,
Shot
we're-
put?
Yeah,
Exactly.
shot put,
Okay.
discus, and hammer is
Okay.
our forte.
Well, we just had Summer Olympics, so I'm
Yeah.
I'm kind of brushed up. Okay, so but both with throwing, right, with your athletics and with being students, you have probably noticed, right, like sometimes it's that anxiety is what drives you to prepare. Like if you know you have a meet coming up, right, that's what you call them, right?
yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
You have a meet coming up, right? You'd be like, okay, it's really important for me to be in the gym or go to this practice or whatever. Or, it's often anxiety that drives you to get that paper done for a class.
Yeah.
If you had no anxiety about it, that actually probably wouldn't be very helpful.
Yeah.
You would feel anxiety is like a, it's, what's the word I'm looking for? But it's like a motivating kind of
driver
feeling.
kind of,
Yeah, it's a
yeah.
driver. It's a motivator for some kind of action, And hopefully we choose the action that's helpful to us. Sometimes we don't, but it is like a driver to do something.
What I'm kind of picturing is like you're running and there's a car driving behind you.
Yeah.
That's that anxiety. Don't
And I often tell my students, like, I'm anxious enough about teaching that I want to do a good job, and I prepare. I prepare my lectures. I think about what we're going to do in class. Now, if you have too much anxiety, that's really debilitating, and then you go
Yeah.
to that class and you can't teach it, or you go to that meet and you choke and you can't do your event. So there is like a tipping point. There is a fine line, and it's not always clear where that line is, but everybody has anxiety, and you do need some level. So let's say, even if you have an anxiety disorder, even if it becomes apparent your anxiety is getting in the way of you doing things you want to do, if you see a professional and work on it, the goal of that treatment isn't going to be to get rid of anxiety. It's going to be to get it to a manageable place,
Okay.
right? Not to get rid of it,
Yeah.
because it's just, number one, not possible. But number two, probably wouldn't be good, even if we could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we do a Chat GPT segment here.
Oh, boy.
It's kind of been a staple even before we came around. And so what we do is we ask you and ask Chat GPT the same question and kind of compare and contrast the answers.
Okay, sounds fun.
So our question is it possible to over prioritize mental health, and what can that look like? You know, what can the effects be?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. So I don't know that I've ever really thought about this before, but I think that anything that becomes sort of like disruptive to your life can be unhealthy.
Yeah.
So I think it is possible to kind of over fixate, over research, over analyze, right? I say sometimes the problem a lot of I don't know about my students, but the problem a lot of my clients have is overthinking. Like, it's both the gift and a curse, you know what I mean? And I see really bright, thoughtful, insightful people. So yeah, I think that it's possible if it starts to interfere with your ability to live the kind of life that you want to live, because you're sort of analyzing and in your head more than you are experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot more to it than that,
Yeah.
but yeah, I wouldn't call it. Sometimes people will say, like, is that quote unquote an addiction? And I would say no, but I think it could be unhealthy. Sure.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So
What's ChatGPT
that's
say?
pretty much the first point that it made. So the first point was that when people over prioritize it, and it can overshadow like other critical areas of your wellness, because you know there's a lot of them. Like there's obviously physical is one that
What
comes
is
to
it, the
mind.
7 pillars, right?
Physical health, spiritual health,
Yeah.
social health,
Yeah,
right? Yeah, financial
exactly. Yeah.
health. Yeah.
That's when it can become problematic. Another thing that it brought up is that a lot of times the term mental health can be used too broadly, and it can become like a catch-all for any social issues that that aren't rooted in mental illness or
That's interesting.
mental problems at all.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times what we need to change are like relationships. I like to, in my classes, we talk about something called the biopsychosocial model, which is basically there's biological, psychological, and social contributors to your mental health and to developing mental disorders. And you kind of have to look at those three areas, and that it's not, sometimes we over-focus on one. Like, we over-focus on our psychological factors. And I like to tell the story of, like, when I was really, really depressed and I was an undergrad, and I went to therapy, I took medication, did all the things, but do you know what, quote unquote, fixed me? Was breaking up with a boyfriend. And I'm like, I'd laugh about it, but it's true, right? Like, a lot of times you have to look at what are the kind of systems, structures, relationships
Yes.
that are negatively impacting you.
Yeah.
Because, like, versus just like, let me fix me, right? Like, what's actually, like, nothing
The
would have gotten
outside
better.
factors.
Yeah, like, and so, like, telling somebody who, you know, who's seriously impoverished and doesn't have a job and doesn't have transportation, like, you need more therapy is probably not it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know?
And it also brought up something similar to that also. It says that the line between like normal life difficulties and mental health can become blurred, and oftentimes people tend to associate one with the other. Like, if you're having like money problems, then obviously you're not going to be too happy about that, but people
And certainly, like,
Combine.
you know, yeah, you can live in poverty and you can also have major depression. Like, the one doesn't preclude the other.
Yeah.
But we do have to be really careful to kind of to look at those
not combine
those
them.
lines,
Yeah.
not
Absolutely.
conflate them. Well, ChatGPT did okay.
Yeah, not too bad
That
actually.
isn't bad.
I've become kind of skilled at being able to identify
Right.
ChatGPT.
Yeah, that's a lot of professors nowadays have to, because all
Yeah.
the COVID days of
You know what?
online classes.
There
and
are
all
just some, like, you know,
They-
dead giveaways.
It's getting easier and easier to tell,
that. It
unfortunately.
is, yeah.
Oh, in my, this is really an aside, but then in my quest for kind of, they have these detectors, you know, so you can detect if a
Yeah.
student has used, but they're flawed just as the AI is flawed. But now they also, I hesitate to say this on the podcast. I was
Yeah,
gonna say-
let's tell the
Oh,
secrets.
snap.
Tell the secrets. Listen up, students. Listen up.
Oh, well, it's fine. I'd still be able to tell. Just that, you know, like the levels this is going to, like they
Uh-huh.
have things now, they're like, they will detect if your paper has AI
Uh-huh.
and then make it so that it's undetectable.
Are you serious?
That's what they claim. I actually don't know how
Uh-huh.
good they would be at doing that, but just the fact that that's like a service
Yeah.
It really is
is
crazy.
a little
Do
scary.
you know like the name of it? Or?
I actually don't, and I probably wouldn't share it if I actually don't.
Just messing.
I know.
So I have two more questions
Sure.
for you. So, you know, as someone who's big into the world of psych, what do you think about like all the new AI and all that?
As far as
Just
Like
in general,
AI?
you know, like people maybe getting their information from it, or you
Yeah.
know, like what it can become in the future. Kind of, I know there's a lot of speculations and
yeah, I mean, I think that what we have to learn, like in any field, is kind of like how to use these tools for good,
Uh-huh.
you know, and like how to work with them, like not to just kind of write them off as you know, like write them off as an annoyance or that they're threatening, because I think that we can probably figure out ways to really use them. I don't know necessarily what they mean for the future of mental
Yeah.
health yet. I have seen some things where, like, you know, you can like tell ChatGPT your problems, right, and ask
Yeah.
for advice,
Yeah.
and like maybe it does a solid job. I don't think any of these tools will ever replace like human
Face to
connection
face.
and like
Yeah.
genuine human reciprocal connection. And I have seen some people kind of do some thought experiments where they kind of go back and forth with it, and like it hits a limit, it hits a wall, you know what I mean? Like it does okay at first, but I like to think about like how we can use it to help us. Like I think there is some potential for, you know, like creating templates for writing therapy notes. Like that's something I have to do a lot of, right? Or creating templates for like a treatment plan. Like I think that AI can be integrated and we can find a way for it to be helpful and useful in our field, but I don't think it's going to I don't think I'm going to be replaced.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Not anytime soon.
And then finally, would you just like to speak on like resources that students on campus or anybody may have if they're struggling through?
Yeah, I can talk about a couple. So, I mean, obviously for students, there's the University Counseling Center, and hopefully most students know about the University Counseling Center. It's located right at Eder, like the
Okay.
same, whatever building that is. I'm not an expert.
It's
Noggle?
yeah.
Noggle.
Noggle.
I had to walk someone there recently. So, and all students are entitled to, I don't know what the number is, but a certain number of free sessions.
Okay.
So that is good to know. But if you need to talk to someone and you don't want to go through the counseling center for whatever reason, there are other options. There is Psychology Today has a therapist finder tool. You can input like your zip code, your insurance, whether you want a male or female therapist, like you can get very specific
So
with
it's
it.
customizable.
Yeah,
That's
there's
cool.
another one called Grow Therapy, same thing. And then there's one that is called Open Path Collective, and what's neat about that one is it's low cost therapy, so they guarantee like no sessions over $70, like on average 40 to 70, which if you have insurance and you pay a copay, it would be less than that.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But if you don't have insurance, that is really good because out of pocket for therapy without insurance is pricey.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah. And of course, Connection AOD, wellness,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
you know, Pride Center. I think a big takeaway, like you don't have to see a professional necessarily, but talk to people.
Exactly.
Talk to your friends about your mental health. Talk to your family. You know, you don't not everyone needs a therapist. Like that's not necessarily the end all be all, but everybody needs to talk to someone.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. I think that's a
That's a cool
That's
ending.
it.
No,
a
I
good
love that.
ending there. I think
Okay.
we
All right,
covered
everybody.
just
Thank you.
about everything. So
Thank you,
thank
Dr.
you for
All right.
joining us.
And have a
Thank
good
you.
one.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.